want to share with you something that is so near and dear to me, the history of the Canary Islanders in Texas. The Canary Islanders and their descendants have lived in Texas for almost 300 years. ¿Quiénes eran? Who were they? ¿Cómo se ganan la vida? How did they make a living? From which island or islands did they originate? How did they get from the Canary Islands to South Central Texas? Sit back, relax, and let's start learning about the early Tejano pioneers. We will explore 4 centuries of history. Don't worry, this will only be a thumbnail sketch of the Canary Islanders of Texas history. Let's start by exploring what was happening in Nueva España leading up to the 18th century and the events that would eventually lead to a group of Canary Islanders settling in La Provincia de Texas. Here we see the area claimed by Spain in the early 1700s. It's the area in yellow gold. It takes in Texas down to South America, all islands in the Caribbean, and Florida. It was mostly open land inhabited by Native Americans. The capital of this new Spain today is the city of Robeline in western Louisiana. Fort St. Louis was established by Frenchman René Robert Cavelier, Sieur de la Salle, in March of 1685, near what is now Matagorda Bay, Texas. The Spanish discovered the fort in ruins in 1689. Word was then sent to the Spanish crown informing the king of the French encroachment on Spanish-claimed territory. Spain then authorized and funded expeditions into northeast Nueva España. The first entradas, or expeditions, into Texas started in 1690 and explored the coastline. Later entradas went all the way to East Texas. In 1692, Father Massanet and Domingo Terran's exploration brought them to what we now call the San Antonio River, where Father Massanet named the Native American Yanaguana community San Antonio de Padua, after the Portuguese saint of lost items. Spain conducted several more expeditions preceding the 1716 Diego Ramon expedition, guided by Louis Saint-Denis, which resulted in the establishment of Mission San Antonio de Padua, headed by Father Olivares, along the banks of San Pedro Creek, a major water source that would play an integral part in our ancestors' livelihood. It was Martín del Alarcón's expedition in May 1718 that would establish the Presidio de Béjar and the Mission San Antonio de Valero along the banks of San Pedro Creek. This particular mission would move 2 additional times before its final location, which is now in the middle of downtown San Antonio and whose convento is commonly known as the Alamo. Spanish officials learned a valuable lesson with the entradas. They needed to establish communities in the vast openness in northeast Nueva España if they wanted to maintain their claim to all of this territory and to keep the ever-encroaching French from crossing from Louisiana into Texas. El Marqués de San Miguel del Aguayo was responsible for the beginning of colonization in Texas. He recommended that steps be taken to settle 400 families between San Antonio and the East Texas missions. One half of the settlers to be recruited from Galicia, the Canary Islands, and Havana, and the other half to be composed of loyal Tlaxcalan Indians. In 1729, King Felipe V of Spain approved El Marqués' plan and solicited families from the Canary Islands to settle Texas. And so the arduous journey began. 285 years ago, 25 families departed the port city of Santa Cruz in Tenerife aboard the Santísima Trinidad y Nuestra Señora del Rosario. That was March 27, 1730. It arrived Havana, Cuba in May, and then departed for Veracruz in July. By August, 5 months after departing Tenerife, our ancestors found themselves in the port city of Veracruz. Our ancestors were undoubtedly hardy, determined, and persistent. What else could explain how and why they would walk more than 1,100 miles over a 6-month period to settle in a foreign land? Although they landed at Veracruz as 10 families, the next few months would find these families expand in number to a total of 16. While some, such as Lucas Delgado, would never make it to their final destination, others would be born along the way, expanding the total number that would arrive to 56. What were some of the names of those travelers? The heads of the 16 families are listed here. You can see most of the settlers were from Lanzarote. Vicente Travieso and Francisco de Arrocha from the islands, but not originally part of the group, joined the traveling families after they departed Veracruz. There were 4 single men who made up the 16th family according to the official Spanish records from Saltillo dated November 1730. These hardy individuals would take 6 months before arriving at their final destination. The 16 families, consisting of 56 people, were met by the families and soldiers of the Presidio de San Fernando de Béjar when they arrived at about 11:30 a.m. on March the 9th, 1731. What was life like for the families in their new surroundings? Although a military establishment had existed for 13 years, the Isleños established the very first civil settlement in Texas. The king provided many of the essentials for the Isleños to attain and maintain their new lifestyle in the area surrounding the Presidio and the nearby 5 missions: horses, cattle, sheep, utensils, and so on. Only a few months passed before the captain of the Presidio led the Isleños in setting up their community according to Spanish laws. The church would serve as the central focal point, with an open plaza and houses forming a square around the church and plaza. In August of 1731, 5 months following their arrival, the Isleños would create the first civil government. Juan Leal Goraz would be the very first alcalde. This position wasn't totally foreign to Don Leal. He served as the alcalde when he left his home in Teguise, Lanzarote the year before. The Canary Island settlers and their descendants would continue to serve in various government positions for more than 100 years. In 1738, 7 years after their arrival, the Isleños set the first cornerstone for their church. It would be another 8 years before they would finish San Fernando. San Fernando was now a cathedral and one of the oldest Catholic cathedrals in the United States. Many of the Isleños' descendants would be baptized, married, and buried in and around San Fernando Cathedral. As the Isleños assimilated into their new community, they adapted well to their environment and surroundings. They became successful farmers, served with the Spanish Army at many of the presidios throughout Texas, and established many of the first ranches in South Texas as well. Some of the descendants still live on the original land grants. Life was not easy on the open frontier. Dr. Frank de la Teja's book, San Antonio de Béjar, A Community on New Spain's Northern Frontier, describes well the many challenges the Isleños and other Bejareños faced on the vast, vulnerable, borderless lands they called home. Research in the archives in Texas and in Mexico reveals several land disputes the Isleños had amongst themselves, as well as the missions. Some disputes, like the one filed in 1778, included as many as 20 rancheros pitted against the church and the mission friars. Ranching was key to their livelihood, and they needed as much land as possible to ensure their survival. It was their successful ranches that would prove beneficial to more than their local community. Many are not familiar with Bernardo del Galvez, what he did for Louisiana, Spain, and his contributions to the American Revolution. Our ancestors in Texas played a significant role in his Revolutionary War efforts. Of the major strategic accomplishments led by Galvez were the massive cattle drives from Texas. The cattle were driven across Texas into Louisiana and then shipped north to feed the starving American revolutionaries. Many of the original Isleños and their grown children were the ranchers that provided more than 11,000 head of cattle in only a 3-year period. History tells us the first 60 to 70 years of life in the vast openness of northeast Nueva España was extremely challenging. The next 60 years would be just as, if not more challenging than anything they had encountered thus far. Father Hidalgo's grito would be heard far beyond Dolores in Mexico, where he sought reforms to help the many poor against Spanish imperialists. The cries for independence didn't go unnoticed in San Antonio. Captain Juan Bautista Casas led a revolt and overthrew the Spanish governor. The revolt would not last long, and a local junta or council of 10 leaders, many of them adult grandchildren of the original Isleño settlers, would reinstate the Spanish-led government. Following this mini-revolution would be skirmishes led by a Republican Army of the North headed by Augustus Magee and Bernardo Gutierrez de Lara. The Republic Army was successful in their battles against the Spanish Army. The Battle of Medina, however, would have a very different outcome. The Battle of Medina was August 18, 1813, approximately 20 miles south of downtown San Antonio. It would be the bloodiest battle ever held on Texas soil. More than 1,000 Tejano, American, and Native American lives would be lost to General Arredondo and his Spanish army. Those who survived the battle were found and then massacred. Those who fled were chased by the Spanish army, who had orders to kill on sight. Less than 100 men would survive. Several of our ancestors fled to and sought refuge in Louisiana. General Arredondo appointed 2 officials to name the survivors and inventory their property for seizure. Here is a list showing the brands belonging to the cattle that were seized. The formal list is found in the Saltillo archives and has 96 names, along with a description of their homes. All were seized. Those highlighted with a yellow star are Isleño adult grandchildren of the original settlers. Although many lives and property were lost, their struggle was not in vain. Mexico gained independence from Spain in 1821, and the Isleños would find themselves citizens of Mexico. However, this wouldn't be the last struggle for the Isleños in their struggle for independence. Santa Anna and his dictatorship would be the cause for yet another uprising in Texas. The Tejanos, native-born Texans of Hispanic origin, and Texians, Texans of Anglo origin, would band together to rise up against the Mexican army. Their initial conflicts, much like the early uprisings against the Spanish, were very successful. Texas' Declaration of Independence would be signed at Washington on the Brazos in East Texas. At the same time, the Alamo was falling to the Mexican army. While Isleños were not in the Alamo during the battle, several served under Captain Juan Seguin as spies and couriers. They then followed him to the Battle of San Jacinto, where the Tejanos and Texians would prove successful in defeating Santa Anna and his army. So Isleños were no longer Mexican citizens, but were now citizens of the Republic of Texas. One of the constant aspects of our Isleño ancestors' lives is service to their community. They continued to serve as soldiers and militiamen. Some were also part of the original Texas Rangers, law enforcement officials who would protect the community against raiding Indians. In 1845, Texas joined the United States as its 28th state, and the Isleños then found themselves United States citizens. Even though they were officially American citizens, they wouldn't be treated as such. These Spanish-speaking native-born Texans would be treated as foreigners in their own homeland. They continued to eke out a living farming and ranching. They also performed a great service as freighters or carreteros, hauling freight with ox carts to and from the Texas coast. At this time, San Antonio served as a major distribution center for goods into and out of Texas. One of the constant things that affected our Isleño ancestors in Texas was change. Our ancestors' citizenship would change yet again. The Isleños became citizens of the Confederate States of America when Texas seceded from the Union in 1861. Many of the Isleños were conscripted into service. Some, because of their pre-war experience in hauling freight, continued to do this for the Confederate Army. Cotton was the South's major cash crop and served as a major funding source for the Army. When researching Texas Isleño ancestor participation in the Civil War, it's highly likely you'll find your ancestor served under Colonel Santos Benavides, the highest-ranking Hispanic officer in the Confederate Army. He was based in Laredo. From Reconstruction to today, the descendants of the original Canary Island settlers continue to serve their community, state, and nation. They farmed and ranched the lands, much of which was lost following the Texas Revolution. Some of the descendants served in our nation's armed forces, like Edgar Tobin of World War I. He was a flying ace. Or Emery Courville, a translator who landed at Normandy in World War II. Many left the farm and ranching life. They moved to the city, and throughout the years would become bankers, salesmen, firefighters, law enforcement officials, professors, lawyers, nurses, housewives, and accountants. One of our goals as an organization is to educate others about our history. I want to thank you so much for the opportunity to share with you today a brief look at our history of the Canary Island settlers and their descendants in Texas.